Well, this morning we'll start with video 5, and this one here may consist of a couple different or separate videos because I'll be covering quite a bit of material, so I'm not exactly sure how it's going to turn out, but I'll just do as God guides me and pray that everything is done in such a way that you can understand it. I want to talk a little bit about death. You see, death is never defined, or as far as I know, is never defined as extinction, annihilation, non-existence, unconscious, things of this nature. And when you study the Bible, you find that death is really the separation of two different things. There's a lot of false teachings, I guess by false teachers, that wrongly defines death as extinction, so on, and that man has no conscious existence apart from the body when he dies. So when man dies, from the very best I can understand, there is several things that occurs. Of course, as I said before, I think that death, as far as the physical death, is when all bodily functions cease to function. In other words, everything just dies. Now, when you have the physical death, you have a separation of the body and soul. And when you read the Bible, it says that the body returns to the dust from which it came, and the soul returns to God who gave it. Now, when you look at a spiritual death, that is when man is separated from God. And when you look at the verse that you find in Revelations about the second death, there again is a separation of man from God. Now we're speaking primarily here of the soul. So far we've seen that everything is, with the spiritual death, is separation from something. Now, you find reference in the Bibles that death to sin, or dead in sin, and so on and so forth. And this sin separates from being a Christian, if that makes any sense to you. When it talks about dead to law, this means there's a separation between Christians and the laws of Moses. And it's just like, as an example, how do you say it? Okay, marriage by death. In other words, you're married, excuse me, you're married and your spouse dies. Okay, that is a form of separation between man and woman. In the Bible, that's really the only honored separation between man and woman. Now granted, it talks about giving divorces and things of this nature, but in all reality, that's not how God meant for it to be. The only thing that God truly recognizes as separation between man and wife is death. So we see here that death, when spoken of in the Bible, refers to two things: the physical death and the spiritual death. And the second death mentioned in Revelations is not a physical death, but is a spiritual death. And the spiritual death is only separation from God. Just like with Adam. When Adam sinned, he was separated from God and put out of the Garden of Eden. I guess you'd say out of paradise. Out of the presence of God. The same thing occurs with our second death. We're put out, if we're in sin when we die, we're put out of the presence of God. We're not allowed into paradise, and we're cast into hell or the lake of fire. And of course, as we know, that's the area that I'm trying to cover with all of this. Now I hope you understand what I've tried to share there. And as we get more into the videos, be able to understand everything that's going on and how it's not from God being a bad God or nothing of this nature, but it's because of His love for us that He allows us to do whatever we want, with the full knowledge that we have to suffer the consequences associated with what we choose. And so now with that, I'm going to go into a bunch of Bible verses, and I'll post them in a text format where you can kind of prepare for it, and then I'm going to read those verses to you. And these that I'm going to be reading are the ones that found in the Old Testament, and all of them in some way is connected to our spiritual death. And I hope you can see and understand this as we go along.